a week or so ago, I asked a subscriber in Israel if she could send me a list of female hostages who had not been returned by Hamas. She sent me a list. There are 14 people on this list. This was a few days ago, remember. Figures were still unsure. But she sent me a list of 14, and they are, with one exception, all young women in their 20s and teens. And Hamas says it can't account for them. As I said in a previous video I made, I'll tell you more about in a minute, I think we all know what happened to those young women. I'm Granny Opterix. Okay, so on November the 15th, I made a video which was called My Theory About the Fate of the Gaza Hostages, and I'll leave a link in the description. And I don't think I've been proved wrong, but then it's very difficult to be wrong about a situation involving Muslims kidnapping young women. Because there's part of the Islamic law, it's part of Islamic jurisprudence. There is actually a legal category. It's called a Sharia. And Sharia is usually, politely, in English, translated as a concubine, but basically it means war booty. As Muhammad said, you can keep what your right hand possesses. That is, if you've been fighting and you grab a woman, then she's yours. It's yours to keep. And the word Sharia probably comes from the word surah, which means pleasure. So this is a category of female that is simply for pleasure, or rather, probably not hers, but certainly her captors. And it didn't surprise me at all when these women disappeared entirely. It wouldn't surprise me either to discover that some of them at least had been sold on to other Arab countries or somewhere in North Africa. There's thriving slave markets in those areas because slavery in Islam is still allowed religiously. Many North African countries especially say, oh no, we're not doing that anymore, and that's because they have been colonized by France or European countries, and this was written out of the law by their colonial masters. But in places where there were no colonial masters, or the colonial masters have gone and the influence has dissipated, it's coming back. Especially now in Libya, where government's broken down, there is nothing, there is a very thriving slave trade there. Everyone knows that. And I'm interrupting myself here to remind you to click like, to subscribe and to share. And if you're on YouTube, remember to click the notification bell. All the links to my other channels are in the description, including links to donation sites. I'm always grateful for donations, of course, but just clicking like is the best thing you can do for this video and my channel generally. And I'm reminding you that the Christmas 2023 competition is now open. The link to the video telling you all about it is also in the description. So that's what's happened to these women, I'm pretty sure. There might be a couple being kept as Sharia within Gaza somewhere, but I should think more of them have been smuggled out and sold. And as I said, the children that are missing, well, into the adoption market if they're very lucky. You know, they'll be fair-skinned, blonde, red-haired children, and that's quite a desirable thing in many Arab countries. But it might not even be Arab countries. We don't know who these, where these slave traders sell their goods. Could be all over the world, of course. So that's the somewhat depressing speculation I have, which I still stand by, and which is borne out. I mean, if you look at what happened in Britain, it's still happening, isn't it, of certain Muslim groups enslaving young white working class girls. And they actually referred to them as slaves. In fact, there's one situation, I'm sure there are many more, but there's one I read about, where her owner branded her with his name. And he didn't see, and the thing is that most of the people in these communities do not see anything wrong with that. They see it's against British law, but since they have no respect for British law, then they have no respect for that law either. And there is certainly a thread of Muslim culture which is very tolerant of the idea of slavery. Even at times when, I'm trying to remember, there's a black American writer, Eldridge Cleaver, I think it was Eldridge Cleaver, who went to North Africa thinking he'd find a Muslim society he could live with, and he realised that there were black slaves there. It's a sort of complicated indentured servitude at that time, but he realised that's what it was. He spoke out against it, and he ended up having to live in France because he couldn't live in those countries anymore. He knew what they were doing. So, yeah, I'm, of course, very angry, but I am not surprised. And what I am, well, I suppose not surprised about is that all the Western people who are supposed to be in charge of this sort of thing, like the Red Cross and the UN, yeah, I know, the UN, they're not mentioning the possibility of slavery for these girls. And it's not just, I'm not just having a go at this particular situation, of course. I did a lot about the Yazidis when ISIS was rampaging across the Levant. I feel very strongly about that. But you can see a pattern there, can't you? It's happened in the Levant with Yazidis, because they happen to be handy and they're not considered Muslims by the ISIS people. And now it's happened in Israel with Hamas. It's the same thing. It comes from the same cultural background. It's been given the blessing by the same historical legal framework. And until international organisations acknowledge this, it will go on. And everybody's being terribly polite. You know, they're talking about Hamas not being able to find them, or they're with another group like Islamic Jihad and they can't get on with them. But what happened was that they had a pause in the fighting. And that pause involved a sort of dribble of hostages. That's how they were buying the pause. And then when they got to the end of it, and there were still, you know, I think so, I understood it to be about 19 or 20 female hostages. But anyway, however many it was a significant number, and they weren't turning them over. And they said to Israel, well, look, we can't find these women. Will you take some men instead? And Israel said, no, we want all the women and the children, and we want them now. And Hamas can't produce them. They would have done because they needed the break. They can't produce them. They have already gone. Now, they've either been murdered by their owners after a week's fun, or they've been sold into other parts of the Middle East. And that's simply the situation. And nobody is talking about that. It's easier to talk about them having been murdered than having been enslaved and sold. Right, sold and enslaved, one or the other. We find it easier to talk about them being killed. Well, I'm quite sure they were far too precious for that. Hamas needs the money. I said that in my first video, and after that, a few days ago, it was a while ago, I can't lay hands on it now, maybe you can take my word for it, one of the narratives that's coming out of the Hamas captives was that one of them said they were loading some hostages onto a truck or something, and there was one girl being pulled on, and one of the others said, no, she's got to go to one side. She's Syria. I mean, he actually said that. That's it. War booty. A sex toy. Well, yeah, That's what I'm saying about the hostages. There's no point in beating around the bush. It's not only, in my opinion, it's a probability. Even in the least strong feeling, it's a possibility, and nobody's mentioning it, well, except me. Okay, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.